Hey guys, it's beloved political commentator Matt Lewis back with another exciting episode of Matt Lewis and the News. We're back here today at the Leadership Institute, and I want to just say a quick word about LI. I actually interned here. I worked at the Leadership Institute for 4 years, and it is America's premier conservative training organization. If you ever wanted to learn how to get a job on Capitol Hill, or how to go on television, or how to win a campaign, or just be more effective in public policy, the Leadership Institute is the place to go. Visit them online, leadershipinstitute.org. All right, well, we have a great episode today. We're going to have Christina Hoff Sommers and Danielle Crittenden, who together have the Femsplainers podcast. Christina, of course, is an author and a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and host of the popular video blog Factual Feminist. And Danielle is an author and a contributing editor to the Huffington Post. Christina Hoff Sommers and Danielle Crittenden, welcome to the news.
Well, lovely to be here.
Great to have you here. Christina, how did you ladies, because you have great chemistry on this podcast that you do, how did you get together and decide to team up?
Well, it was years ago.
Yeah, we don't want to say how long ago.
We will not say the date because it's unflattering, but back in the last century, we had been invited, without knowing one another, we had been invited to New York City to take part in a debate
on public television against Betty Friedan.
Betty Friedan and two other people whom we don't remember.
I think one was with the National Organization for Women.
And we were debating whether they should bring back the ERA, something like that. And it was early morning.
It was really early, like 7 or 8. It was early to be going into a downtown TV studio. And we hadn't met. We hadn't met,
and
we're in the green room. We're both nervous because this was Betty Friedan was a huge deal. We were being brought in to be her foil.
And then Danielle did something that got my attention. She takes out her purse, 8 a.m., a little flask, and says, "It helps me, relax."
I had a before TV rule, 1 ounce of vodka, just to calm the nerves. If it was nerve-wracking.
That is great.
And you were smoking a cigarette.
Then I said, "Okay, what the hell?"
Should I ask what is in these coffee mugs right now?
Sadly, not vodka, Matt. We were on to your
podcast. I thought of bringing drinks, but maybe you shouldn't do that with other people's podcasts.
Yeah, it's kind of pushy.
Oh, you guys, anytime. So now I know, Christina, I know you were, I think you considered yourself a liberal at one point and still do consider yourself a feminist. I mean, in the sense of being believing in equality. Danielle, are you a liberal? How do you define your ideology?
I came from the more conservative side in the sort of era when, Reaganomics and Republicans. So I was probably at that time more partisan than you were. But on women's stuff, I would have, considered myself a young feminist. I began covering the women's movement as a journalist. I began my life as a reporter for a tabloid newspaper, and I began covering events, women's events, and wanting to be very sympathetic as a young woman, and coming away seeing them preach very ideological stuff at the time. This would have been in the mid-'80s, so sort of second-wave feminism. Very anti-male, anti-marriage, anti-family. And the family and marriage didn't really affect me because I didn't even think about them at that age, because you were all about your career. But then as I covered them more and thought about what they were pushing more, and then when I did get married young and I did have children young, and I suddenly realized if you want to have a career, the worst thing you can do is put off marriage and children because, that you get into what we were seeing a lot at the time is these women who put their career before everything and then ended up never getting married, never having children. So at the time, I wrote a book called What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us, sort of questioning this logic and looking at women in history. And the most successful women had their children first and then gone on and gotten married and gotten sort of those big questions of life settled. But this caused a firestorm. And you at that same time were coming to the same conclusions about the women's movement. Who stole feminism from academia?
No, I think that's a big thing right now. There's a lot of I'm at the age now where I have a lot of contemporaries and friends who finally are getting married, finally are trying to have kids. They can't have kids, a lot of them, or they have to go the IVF route, and that opens up a whole different discussion. But I don't know if you can say you should. My wife actually does, by the way, say to her younger female friends, like, start having kids now.
Yeah.
Get started. You don't wait.
Well, no matter what technology does. And the other point was, you're younger, you have more energy, you're more flexible. And that's true with marriage as well, that we have this whole notion now. I mean, look at millennials. We talk about this all the time, that it's like men and women don't even know how to speak to each other anymore. And the woman's view is that I have to be a fully formed, independent human being before I can enter into a relationship with a man. And the man is like, I can't do anything perceived as masculine, or I'm gonna, she'll dump me or not talk to me. and you've got this sad thing where the whole romance and tensions and differences between the sexes is just becoming fraught and
polarized
and
so much rancor. And I just don't know how feminism brought us to this place, because it was supposed to be about parity between the sexes, civility, fun. It was liberation. It was a movement of liberation. And both of us have watched it become increasingly repressive and more recently even authoritarian.
Yeah.
While we agree many things, this is what we find interesting on the podcast, is there are things about the Me Too movement that we totally agree with. And there was just too much predatory behavior in the workplace and elsewhere. So you welcome it, but then a certain group, vocal, rather dogmatic hardliners take over, and it becomes repressive.
It is interesting. You're mentioning the 1980s, and I mean, I remember back then, and my perception is, and I listened to Rush Limbaugh, and he had that, we're feminists and we're in your face, and there was a thing where like feminists back then did seem to be like they didn't look great by and large. I'm sure there were exceptions. They were obviously extremists. They were not appealing, and they were a radical minority. And you actually could kind of laugh at them and sort of dismiss them. In fact, you would want a few of them because they were so ridiculous that they actually kind of helped prove a conservative point. We have somehow gotten from that to Alyssa Milano, who's very, I think, appealing, and all of a sudden now you really can't just dismiss even radical feminists. I mean, they are in not only academia, but in journalism and entertainment,
Hollywood,
all over. Yeah.
Most
Silicon
radical
Valley.
feminists, though, don't look like Alyssa Milano. I think what happened at our spot is that first wave, that Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan wave, had sort of subsided. It was the people who led it were getting older, and it made huge gains. And what was left was, as they are in these movements when you've been successful, or sort of the radical ideological shards, around. And then I felt our generation was there to say thank you, and now we're going to tackle, I don't want to hate men. And so the people who were leading the National Organization for Women did seem antiquated and outdated and rigid. And then
That's put much better than I put it, but that's what I was getting at.
but that didn't mean even identifying with Republicans. I don't even want to say conservatives. There wasn't a religious element or whatever. But thinking, well, I want to make this work. I do want to have a career. I do want my husband or partner to respect me. I do want to feel I have the same opportunities as men. But you didn't want to say, but masculinity and femininity are constructs that can't exist. Like,
and bad
must
things,
be erased.
and we must be liberated. We must liberate little boys from their boyishness and little girls from their feminine tendencies. And that was not something that we could endorse. But yet
and that's what started to seep back in. And then there was Andrea Dworkin. And she was kind of the prototype for the feminism we see today, which
She's come
every
back.
man is dangerous,
And her philosophy was not taken that seriously by very many in the 80s. I mean, she was there. She was a presence, but she was on the fringes. Well, that fringe has become mainstream today. And so you're finding positive reconsiderations of Andrea Dworkin, who, you know, wrote extremely denigrating things about the male sex in general, and even about just sex.
Right. That
So
sex
this
is
this sort of
innately
sex-phobic feminism
about
has
power.
come back.
And it's based on this notion that everything is about power. And
Everything.
Everything is about power.
And there's a war on women, a ceaseless war. We are a subordinate class. And you know, no matter how well women are doing, no matter, you know, the barriers that have come down, they will never give up this.
Or what women actually want themselves.
Well, of course.
You know.
And that's back to what we were saying before, is if you had a women's movement that resonated with women, you would realize that, you know, there are a lot of women who, majority actually, according to the best data I've seen, who do want to, when they have small children, they don't want to work full time. It's only about 20% of women that want, if they had their way, you know, that want to work full time. The majority would want to pull back. And it's not true of men. Men and women are different on average in this respect. Yet we have a women's movement that is all about full-time careerism and, you know, getting rid of children or having abortions. Oh, that's fine. But what about fertility issues? What about the human flourishing? And that,
what about life satisfaction? Like, yeah, that's one of the things that when we talk about, like, as we do in the pay gap, and the discussion around that is, you know, there's this gap because women are oppressed and not paid the same for equal work, and the correction to that is to get all women in the workforce full time. You know, it's like some, you know, old Russian communist nightmare that the minute you had any ability, you were able-bodied, you had to be picking potatoes or something, and then to the rest of your life. And we've stopped talking about, well, forget even motherhood. Like, what is it? Where do you get your satisfaction in life?
Yeah. Couldn't you? I mean, you could make a pretty good argument that actually women have their priorities in line better than men,
yeah.
Right? That actually you should be. I mean, when you're on your death, you know, the old trope. You're on your deathbed. Do you say, I wish I'd worked another, you know, longer hours at the office, or do you say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family? I wish I'd, whatever it is. It may be that women actually are superior in the sense that they have their priorities more in order, and that, like, you know, putting on a man-tailored suit and climbing the corporate ladder isn't the most fulfilling, best thing you could actually spend your time doing.
well, there are those who excel at it and enjoy it, and that's fine. Some are women, slightly more are men. And I want a society where people can choose the path to happiness. And as it happens, on average, men and women take somewhat different paths. But that's what I thought feminism should be. It should just be sort of helping people, having a society that, where you satisfy as many preferences as you can and encourage human flourishing. And I don't see that right now. And I'm more worried now than I've ever been because, as you said, this fringe, this sort of angry contingent is taken more seriously. This war on women narrative has taken over. And you have a lot of young women who are very angry at men.
Well, or it's meddled with their brains and both sexes' brains and the sense of priorities. And you think, I have a daughter 27 and a daughter 17, and you know, you wouldn't cross. I mean, they're like future leaders, both of them. They're both fierce personalities and strong, but this idea that, you know, one of our daughters recently got sick, and the idea that your whole life doesn't stop for that child, and that's your everything. And this idea that, well, no, you know, I really would rather be at the office, you know, that the office is more meaningful to me than this child. And until you have a child, maybe it's just hard to understand that that's where your heart and your life is, and for fathers too.
I wouldn't
you know?
want a husband or a wife that prioritized work over the family.
Right, but that's sort of where the discussion is, you know.
Where the culture is. It's very hard to have families now. It's almost a privilege to get married and have kids.
Yeah.
It's increasingly inaccessible to people. And we built that. We did that. And feminists played a role. And I think it's time to sort of reconsider, because if I had it all to do over again, I'd have many more kids and more dogs.
Yeah, you're getting very dangerously on like the dog rights train. Not that I'm not on that train with you, Christina, but
I'm on that train.
Well, Christina, you just got back from, by the way, so many ways, directions I could go with this conversation, but I do want to find out how you just got back from a tour where you were debating somebody.
Yes, in Australia.
Yeah, how
with
did that come to be?
Roxane Gay.
the misnamed Roxane Gay.
Yes, yeah, Roxane
Angry.
Angry. She would not look me in the eyes. I mean, she just, I thought I could go there and it was supposed to be a conversation. This very idealistic young man, so sort of a lecture entrepreneur, invited both of us. And I was surprised she accepted, because often sort of hardline feminists she is don't even believe in debate. Why should I debate someone who's internalized the patriarchy? They don't want to debate you. And, but she did. And so I thought, okay. And I imagined a situation like this where we could talk. It was
moderated by a man.
Yes. Well, there was
strike one.
Yes.
Poor guy.
One of them.
He looked terrified.
He dared to make a joke. And
not funny.
the audience was, we had about, for each debate, about 1,000 people, 900 just diehard Roxane fans, and then 100 people were my fans. And they jeered at me, and everything she said, you know, they were applauding and dissolving in laughter at things that I didn't quite see. Is that funny? But it doesn't matter. And it never got off the ground. It just was a shit show.
Well, you can watch the video. The good thing is they did video it. And so whatever you felt in the theater when you objectively watch the video, as now a lot of people have been corresponding.
Well, Jesse Signal wrote about it because there was more that happened. Apparently,
this was in New York Magazine.
It was in New York Magazine. I thought it was fine because I was rattled. I mean, the audience was ferocious. I thought they would storm the stage. So I had to carefully, while I was answering, I also had to calibrate the levels of anger and, you know, is this all right? It was a very out-of-body experience. So, but when it was over, I thought, all right, whatever, it's fine. She did not think it was fine for reasons that are strange. And she had an entourage, or I don't know, she has lawyers and agents. And
yeah, you got a
publicity team. I know, I do. I was just
Let's get some muscle over here.
You need guys
or
with
what is that,
earpieces.
Rocky III and the Russian.
You should come with a male entourage.
She was like the Russian.
I think Dolph Lundgren is actually available.
But she had this, and they started just bombarding this gentleman who had invited us, demanding that, she wanted to choose her own moderator. Didn't want him. Didn't want to have a man. Wanted to have an indigenous woman she'd found who was going to be the moderator. And would I agree to that, he asked. And I said, well, I want you, but let's compromise. I mean, I thought the whole thing was absurd, but if she was that adamant, I didn't want the whole event to come crashing down, because by then I was worried about him.
Yeah.
Because he sacrificed a lot to make this event happen.
Yeah, it was sort of his money behind it, too,
It was
I
his
think.
money.
It's like telling your host, I don't want you as host. But the thing that seemed to have set her off, and this is a big issue right now, I think, in Western feminism versus the world, is somebody asked whether, or maybe it was the host.
He showed a little video
of women
showing
getting,
Indonesian women being corrected by, you know, virtue policemen coming around and measuring their hijab and, you know, and then
getting beaten at some point, right?
Beating their feet and so forth. And what did she think? And she considered this insulting that he dared to bring this up. And then she kind of got lost in verbiage about, well, I don't know if it's my place, you know, to tell.
Well,
and plus things are things are so bad here too. And she was equating the life of an American woman with what's going on in Indonesia or Iran or Malaysia.
Right, but she sort of said it was that view taken to extreme was it is not a Western woman's, or really any woman who is different from a woman getting beaten or burnt in a video, to speak out. You know, and even implying it was kind of Lady Bountiful of the Western women to stand in solidarity with women in Iran who are ripping off their hijabs and things. And when you start thinking that way, that's where, like, what kind
it
of
is weird, because
women's rights movement is this?
Because you could certainly argue that the left has this these contradictions.
Right.
You know, you can't be for, radical Islamism, or at least tolerant of it, and also be a hardcore feminist who stands up for women's rights.
But they
Those two
manage,
things,
because what they want to be is very anti-America, anti-Western culture.
So it is consistent.
It's consistent. And so this is...
It looks really hypocritical.
It's inconvenient, and so they ignore it. And it's very distressing, because I go to some international women's conferences, and I see women who are fighting for the rights of women in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia, Iran, Cambodia. You meet the sort of modern day Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Sojourner Truth from those countries. These are the most inspiring women in the world. And they ask for solidarity for American women, and they wonder where we are.
Yeah, like how is their voice going to be heard if it can't be carried out of the country? And
it can't, because there's just very little cooperation. And you would think, like on our campuses, if you go back in the 1980s, there was a lot of solidarity with the movement against apartheid in South Africa, and there were shanty towns on campuses, and the students were focused on a genuine world injustice. Well, where are today's students with all this feminist consciousness? Where are they on gender apartheid in Saudi Arabia? Or
well, when 1 out of 3 women are being raped on American campuses.
I was going to say exactly.
We've got our hands full. The other, there's a similar contradiction, right, with the trans movement, I would think, especially when it comes to female athletics, where you have feminists who are ostensibly for empowering women.
Women's sports, Title IX, so proud to get women,
right?
Soccer, playing soccer and all of that. And at the moment that that's really successful, then suddenly they just sort of give in to the demands that those who have transitioned, who maybe still
or
have
not even. I mean,
See, that's
the
my
other.
thing.
That's like they're not even walking the walk, as it were.
That's my thing. I'm actually okay with if you were willing to chop off your penis. I'm willing to call you a woman at that point. Like that's you've made a pretty big sacrifice at that point.
I think I would expect bigger sacrifices. My thing is getting in the minivan at 7 a.m. with screaming children and dealing with a mess.
But the people I guess it's called pre-op or something. The verbiage of the term of art. You haven't quite, and now you're gonna be competing against women. In races,
and you can call yourself
wrestling?
trans now. I mean, I can say right now that I'm a man, and you can't question it.
Right.
And
and it's a racket, if I may say, in some of these sports, because a man who is not going to be the gold medalist or even the top of his high school, track team, they then declare themselves women, and then they just clean up, and it's going to eliminate women's sports. And the Olympic Committee is now just having to deal with it and go by things like, well, if you have a certain amount of testosterone, but after all the steroid scandals, now we're entering into this whole new world where if you're genetically male, competing in powerlifting.
Yeah. So I guess there's an argument, like if you're a conservative, okay, let's have more of this. Let's let this play out, right? Let's go ahead.
Right, because it will, in the end, it's going to annihilate feminism, because if women, the concept of woman isn't a stable construct, and it's just an artifact of a culture gone by, and now we're just gender fluid, and you can't really know who's a man or a woman. I don't really see how you have Title IX lawsuits and things. I mean, it's going to become very messy, and it's not going to be helpful to women. And what's so absurd is you now have, especially young feminists who've had one too many gender studies courses, and they think
Which
that...
is one, by the way.
It's true. Sadly enough, it's true, because it's propaganda, 90%. What they believe is that, it's not really true that men are physically stronger than women. And they think that it's just a myth. And some women are stronger and some men are stronger, and it'll all just, So they're suggesting maybe we shouldn't have male and female teams. Well, I will tell you.
Yeah, the women get stuck it again. Here we are at the bottom. We finally get women's sports, and now men are going to come and take them away from us.
Once upon a time, that would have been seen as a feminist movement, like you're leading the charge to have a league of our own or something, right? And now...
Well,
and
Martina
we have... Yeah, I still.
Navratilova.
Navratilova.
It's been very.
Not to mansplain.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
You did
mansplain or
You did
manspread.
kind of mansplain there.
No, but she's been like, it's funny to say brave, but she's been very brave. She's been out in this, protesting this. The other place that beyond sports that, and this is where the radical feminists are at war with the trans movement. I mean, they're sort of eating themselves, because another area, and we were interviewing a woman in Canada to whom this is happening. She runs a radical feminist newspaper and things. She's been banned from Twitter because she was writing
Maybe you can't say it on this podcast.
Well, okay.
We could be deplatformed.
Okay, well, what she was
She
writing
said.
against was that trans men are now coming into, forget bathrooms or whatever, women's shelters, where you're dealing with women who obviously have been abused by men and their children, and are uncomfortable with a man, such as a woman, quote unquote, coming in to these shelters, and they feel threatened and uncomfortable. And that's now seen as bigotry. I think one of the Vancouver shelters got its government funding pulled for it for trying to
So
keep.
if you're an abused woman who goes to a battered women's shelter, you are the bigot
Exactly.
if you feel uncomfortable.
But then in defending these women who felt scared in these situations, not that the man was necessarily threatening, but they're there to be away from men, that she wrote on Twitter, women are not men and men are not women. Men are not women.
That was it.
And she's off Twitter. She's been banned for life. And she's suing Twitter, but it is a kind of sort of, the last time we saw this kind of not accepting reality or speaking against it was like, under communism, under sort of,
Where you were, you were
like green
compelled by the
is red
government.
and black
Yeah.
is white, and you can be a non-person for saying something that
And we
is-
say that, I should point out, both Danielle and I are sympathetic to trans people, and I see it as a genuine, human rights issue, and it is an identity. And as you say, if someone goes through the transition, and so I would, of course, want everyone to be kind, and I hate when you see the bullying and you hear the stories of the mistreatment, and we have to get past that. But what you don't want is then to turn around and start bullying people for, saying, oh, well, only women can get pregnant. And apparently that's transphobic to say that, according to some groups. So they've gone from being a liberation movement into being censorious and just too aggressive.
funnily enough, into a bullying movement.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. I mean, I think of the left, and there's a common theme lately of this podcast. It used to be, at least stereotypically, that like the right or conservatives were more puritanical, and now it seems to me that, when I was a kid, at least, the perception was that liberals were like, hey man, if it feels good, do it. Whatever floats your boat. Like, I'm not here to judge. But there's a lot of judging going on now on the left.
A lot of judging and humorlessness.
Puritanicalism.
When I was young, the left was, the comedians.
Yeah.
And on campus, they could come. The more irreverent, the better.
George Carlin.
And
Lenny
later,
Bruce.
even later, I mean, and this is where, again, to your point about, I mean, the sexual liberation, that was the liberal viewpoint, and then, quite rightly, women began to see it as a bit of a raw deal, and now it's gone the other extreme, that. Yes, it's the conservatives who are saying,
I mean,
I
we
think
don't have
it's
to go
okay
back.
if men
We
and
don't have
women
to
have
go
sex
back.
sometimes and enjoy it. I
Wait
think
a minute.
it's okay.
Did you say that?
I'm going to get banned from Twitter.
Well, and I have to say, I have two boys, and it's a little bit scary to be a dad or a mom of boys in this environment. And I do think that, obviously I want to raise them to be good, respectful people and gentlemen and all that. But there's, I probably shouldn't bring this up because I have never verified this, but I heard a story pretty recently, a couple years ago maybe, about this woman who said, if I have a son, I'm not going to breastfeed him because men already have so many advantages and are already so privileged. If I have a girl, I will.
Had
but
she
not
had
a
the
boy.
baby yet, or should we say this in advance?
I don't even know if this is true.
She might have changed her mind.
I probably shouldn't be trafficking in things that I happen to see on the internet. But it's part of a trend and a theme of there's some weird kind of evil stuff out there where there are, I'm sure it's a very minority of radical feminists who, it's almost like child abuse though, like this sense that little boys are bad, and then the other thing too is the sense that I can just tell you, like as a dad, I can tell that gender is not solely a social construct, because I'm the kind of person, if my kids want to play with dolls, they can play with dolls. If they wanted to wear a pink shirt or a dress, they would, whatever. But my kids basically will make guns out of anything. They'll pick up sticks and that's a bomb, and like they really want to fight. Last night, my son, he comes to me and he's like, "Can we go downstairs and tackle?" He wants to go down to our basement, and he means wrestle. And like, there's nothing in the world he wants to do more than that. And that is just hardwired in him.
It is hardwired.
And it would be abuse for me to be like, to shame him for that.
Not only abuse and shameful, but the typical play of little boys, cross-culturally and cross-species, male play is rough and tumble play, and it's a critical part of their healthy development. And they're learning about who they are, their limitations, and especially rough and tumble play with the father, and then that's where the father can teach some self-control. And now you have parents who think, oh, well, we can't have any rough and tumble play, and they prefer the typical play of little girls, which is, in its way, it can be just as aggressive, it's a little more furtive, but it's theatrical, imaginative games, and turn-taking games, or exchanging confidences with a best friend. You see little girls, that starts very early, and it's unusual for boys to do that. They mainly want that rough and tumble play. And increasingly, our families, our schools are intolerant. They confuse it for aggression. Yeah. It's not aggression. In aggression, when boys are being aggressive, you see unhappiness. They usually, little boys, someone will part angry and in tears. Rough and tumble play is the exact opposite. They can't repress their laughter, their joy, they're happy. They part as friends. Boys who are good at it become popular, and well-liked. Yeah.
And by the way, we may need this someday. I may need a Navy SEAL who grew up wrestling to go in and take out Bin Laden or some pirate.
Well, don't forget, women do make great sharpshooters. I just want to put that
too, and also I think divers, right?
Yeah.
They actually can take the cold water more than men. But my point is,
I don't want to sweaters.
I don't want to try to sanitize everybody and make everybody sit at the little desk. Some people, men and women, rough and tumble, right?
No, and even at this, children get in trouble now, boys, for the stories they write. And when I was working on a war against boys, there was a story about a little boy named Justin in California. The parents were called to the teacher's office because the teacher and the counselor were very worried about Justin's drawing. And the parents came to the school. And he was a good boy. He'd never been in trouble before. But he loved pirates and sword fights. So he made a drawing. And the teacher said, but there are decapitations, there are swords. And the father said, yeah, he likes pirates. And she said, well, I'm very worried about him. And they said, well, has he done anything else? She said, no, but what's this about? And then the father said something that just haunts me, which he said, if this teacher has so little sympathy for my son's imagination, how is she going to be able to teach him? And he was made to feel ashamed for just an innocent,
Think about some of the great writers in the world who wrote about Treasure Island or, the Pirates of the Caribbean.
A monster destroying a city. There will be such stories when little boys can express, what's going on in their mind. But, and if you cut that off, there are other researchers who are now worried because we see that girls are well ahead, significantly ahead, verbally. And they probably have a natural advantage, but it may be that schools are actually giving them even more of an advantage because the boys are discouraged from writing what they want to write, from drawing what they want. Teachers interfere a lot and turn them towards another subject. And when you do that, that's a critical moment. When a child is 4 or 5 and they're, starting to draw and write, that's a frustrating moment for a little boy where they just get pushed back and they feel ashamed.
Thank God. I send my kids to a school that encourages the rough and tumble and
that's good.
This is where single-sex education can be good too for girls as well. But
yes.
You point out often that how successful young women are now all Gen Zs are facing incredible levels now of depression and insecurity, but the women are doing better.
Well, they're
than
much more
their
likely to go to
contemporaries.
college, and they're just.
I was on TV the night around, I think it was the inauguration night, or maybe it was the next day, when the Women's March happened. And I was on for some reason, I was on for 4 hours that day. So I sat through I was a part of a lot of different discussions about the Women's March and all that. And finally, late at night, I said, let's change it up a little bit. I'll throw something else out there to make conversation. And I said, it's also interesting that they're having this Women's March and that women are upset because actually there are a lot of studies that show that women are doing a lot better than some of these men, and especially in working class parts of the country. In fact, you could argue that's part of the reason Trump won, that there are these young men who didn't go to college, women don't want to date them, and I used the word, I said unmarriageable. And the host of the show laughed in my face, I think because of, number one, the concept seemed utterly absurd, and number two, I don't think anybody else on the panel had heard the word unmarriageable before.
Well, they should read Hannah Rosen's The End of Men. Yeah. And she, I don't agree with everything she said in that book, but it was very well researched and sobering that we may face a future where a high percentage, as many as 30% of men in their prime working age will be out of the workforce, not unemployed, just not looking for work.
Well, and
that's
disengaged. And that's part of also the breakdown of communities but I want to take issue, Matt, with something you said earlier about this woman not wanting to breastfeed her boy. Baby is clearly trying to assault her. and to not recognize that if you start giving in at that age and giving consent to that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Teaching them that a woman's
Did he ask permission? Did he ask permission?
No,
he just
and he's just taking it. He's assumed. Yeah. He just assumed he can put his mouth on it.
I think I was assaulted by my son when he was a newborn.
And it's just now coming to you because of therapy.
Right. Yeah. Right. See, now you can go back and be triggered.
Now, I do want to point out that story may or may not be apocryphal, but I will say this.
Or stop being true once she had the kid.
But I will say this, there are coffee mugs. And by the way, you can get this Matt Lewis in the News, very handsome coffee mug on. It's one
very
of our
cool merch.
If you go to patreon.com/Matt Lewis, you can get one of these nice coffee mugs. And also be part of our live studio audience. Sometimes we have people in when we tape these things. We invite folks in, and there's called the Coffee Club. So not just a clever name, but I saw a coffee mug. Somebody tweeted a picture of it, and it said, "The future is female." And I thought, well, that's a great message for all those working class, struggling young men and boys out there in the Rust Belt or wherever. Could be minorities, I don't know.
Could be men in general.
They're not really part of the future. And the truth is, they actually may not be. But to rub it in their face with a coffee mug, I thought was a little bit.
And just this relentless, girl power message, which is fine, but we need boy power too.
To be fair, on our podcast, just to make a plug for our merch, we sell shot glasses. So I think we're taking a more realistic view of the future.
Well, let's plug it. What's the Patreon?
It's Patreon/Femsplainers.
Femsplainers.
We need the help. These drinks don't buy themselves.
Our drinks, because I like.
Well, the coffee and the shot glass really are. You need both.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, after a night of hard drinking, you're going to.
Well, our coffee mugs say coffee on them. But yeah. No, I think though, as you say, looking towards the future, really for both sexes and all of us, a shot glass is more in order than a coffee mug.
It is, and I think that the future shouldn't be female or male. I mean, it should be about.
We're in this together.
And
if women are in trouble, so are men, and if men are in trouble, women are in trouble. We are, codependent in the best possible way. And not to understand that and realize that. You know, if you look back, when we realized that girls were languishing in math and science, there were just massive interventions to strengthen girls. And it worked, and it was wonderful. But we forgot to do that for boys in areas where they were falling behind, in reading, in writing, in school engagement, in college matriculation. And we've got to care about boys as much as girls. And we can't have this strange favoritism. And you know, men, middle-aged men, if they run across, you know, this male-averse, male-phobic women or something, they can turn the other way. But a little boy, what if it's his mother? What if it's his teacher? And there are a lot of teachers that learn this now in our schools of education. The schools of education, I don't even know if the story's been written yet about how much of an impact this, you know, sort of fashionable, woke, you know, a male privilege worldview has taken hold. And you have a lot of teachers, maybe with very good intentions, but if they've studied in their education classes, they learn that men are the privileged sex and, you know, need to be taken down a bit, and that women should be given priority in a time where women are already so far ahead.
Yeah. No, look, I agree. Like, if you are like a rich, old, white guy who owns an NFL team, you are privileged and you are the man. And that's what it is. But that doesn't mean most men are that guy. In fact, that guy might be more inclined to hire a woman to be the manager than he would a man, right? And then there's plenty of struggling guys out there who are not rich and they have obstacles. Maybe they have to overcome health problems. Maybe they can't get hired. Maybe their factory closed down. And then there's going to be this other thing where there are going to be all these young guys who just check out and have sex with robots, play video games, and eat edibles. And that's going to be the brave new world.
Well, it goes back to this idea, and the phrase privilege comes from this too. I think the worst phrase ever said for the women's movement was, unfortunately, I believe it was Gloria Steinem, who said the personal is political. Was that Gloria, or was that?
Well, that goes way back.
But personal. You know what? The personal is personal. The political is political, and it does become, if you start looking through humanity, through ideological terms, of left or right, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And you stop trying to find the truth, which is what all writers and journalists and artists do. They're trying to find the truth or the essence. And that is not political.
I mean, I can tell you, I'm out of the, long out of this game now, but I have young male friends who, in the D.C. area, it's foreign to me that this exists, but like, if you're a young Republican or a young conservative, there are a lot of women that just won't date. You meet them at a bar or something. I mean, I guess some people still do that, the ones who aren't on Tinder. You meet somebody, and if they find out, oh, you work at the RNC, they won't have anything to do with you. In the old days, I think it's because
they're nerds.
Well,
blaming their politics. But the pocket protector was the thing.
Did give
the
away.
Girl said, no.
Alex P. Keaton had lots of game. You know it's true.
I married him.
You married him.
Look, we could get into there's all sorts of conversations to be had about the wage gap and all that, but let's talk about, end on a couple of sort of aspirational type things. And one I wanted to ask you about is advice and career advice. This doesn't just have to be this doesn't just have to be for women, but really like for a young person who is coming up, especially in this environment. Any thoughts you would have there?
I have one thing to say, although it's somewhat frivolous.
We always get into trouble when we give advice on our podcast, so we're very careful now. But
well, what we said before is no one's going to help you do this, but think about, I think it's better to marry early and have your children early. And there needs to be a movement in that direction, because it's just going to suit human nature and biological and psychological development better. What we're doing now is...
Well, let's talk about this for a second. I'm very interested in this. And so right now, I think the the smart thing to do, I'm using air quotes here, is listen. If I'm telling a young man, for example, I'm going to be like, listen, focus on your job till you get to be in your 30 or mid 30s. Take care of that, earn money. Then you're going to be more appealing in the marketplace of attracting a mate, and you're going to have like a better house. You're going to drive a better car. You're going to have your life set. Besides, I think the number one predictor of whether or not you stay married is actually the age at which you get married. So it sounds like conventional wisdom to wait longer, but you're saying no.
Yeah, and that statistic could just be an artifact of who is marrying young,
Yeah.
and it's not something the educated and middle and upper middle class do.
Well, I think you guys are being a little too specific, because I would agree with you, Christina. I'd amend it slightly, and this is what I say to every young who asks, young woman or young man. It's what we tell our children, is to accept the fact that presuming you want to end up with someone sharing your life, which I'm sure 99% of humanity does, to start taking it seriously younger. You have no control when you're going to meet the right person. It may not be till you're 40, but it might be when you're 22. But to start thinking that this is beyond what career choice you make, beyond what school you go to, this is the most important decision you will make in your life, and to treat it as such. And so if you're a young woman dating, you date seriously.
Yeah.
You don't just gotta drift along, go in and out of relationships. You take yourself seriously, and you take what you're doing. It's sort of like shopping. But don't fall into these quasi-marital relationships, or don't. And the same with men. That this is as important for a man to find the right mate as a woman. And maybe, as you say, they come a little later. Men, I've noticed, seem to feel the need to be a little more established in their work. Not so much related to age, but a kind of self-confidence that they know where they're going a little more. But still, that is the most important decision you can make.
Well, I also think that people at some point, I don't know what the age is, but at some point people do get set in their ways. And I've seen
That's
marriages,
Henry Higgins.
late in life marriages, it's not the same kind of partnership.
No, when you're young, you grow together and you change together, and one hopes you change in the right, go in the right direction with one another. But, you get two people who are 37 and they get together and then they want to have a baby, and it's hard. So
yeah, and it's like, don't touch my stuff, or
yeah,
it's no. I got married young by modern standards. I was 26. No, 20. 26 when I got married, 25 engaged. But no, God. Sorry, cut all that. I can't even remember now. 24. But anyway, the point was, and David was like 2 years older than I was. It was
an older man,
obscenely young, and no one else of my cohort was doing it. It felt the freakish thing I could do. It's like going to the moon amongst your friends. And it turned out, thankfully, to be a good thing, because you're so much more open and flexible and willing to live in crappy apartments together.
Yeah.
And and then you look back and you have this whole trajectory and story that you two have written
You grow up
together.
yeah.
right?
And it's quite magical if you're lucky enough to find
And
that.
when you're older, I will say, the most fun when you're of a certain age is your adult children. I mean, it's hard when they're little, but when they're, in their 20s and 30s.
They're great.
They're great.
I want them to be my designated driver.
Yeah.
That's what I'm.
Well, there's that.
I want it to be like, who's watching Pops this weekend?
Yeah. No,
Someone's got to take
they're
him to
so
a
much
First
nap
they
camp.
start teaching you, helping you with your computer. That's the
That's
first
already
sign of
happened.
liberation.
They're 6 and 8, and that's already happened. So let me ask you this though: is this something that you would want to just encourage, like rhetorically, or should public policy like incentivize this?
It would be nice if we could have a discussion, but right now it's so off the agenda. It's certainly not on any feminist agenda, and it may be that we're going to have to learn this from Europeans, because feminism and social movements have just worked out a little differently in places like Denmark and Holland. They sometimes say these are the countries that forgot feminism they didn't forget feminism. They integrated what was best of feminism, but they just didn't take the rancor and the divisiveness and this sort of radical individualism and careerism. They factored into it a notion of a well-lived life and of coziness and beauty and delight.
And family and partnerships, but also you don't have to be, you could be policy neutral. One of the things we talked about recently is like when we were talking about women in work, is you can encourage, and it can be to a mother, it could be to a father, but you know, not tax credits, but $500 a month in cash, and you spend it how you want. You know, if it helps you with daycare, great, but if it helps you stay home, or one of the parents stay home, that's great too.
Like one parent staying home, that's important. Or, you know, being with the little children.
Right, but designating it, well, you'll only get this as a daycare credit. You know, that is forcing a kind of choice.
That people don't want.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. People say, oh, well, you're saying that because that's your choice, but most people want to work. No, they don't. And it's men and women differ on this. When men have children, they work more, and women pull back, and it's usually because that's what they want to do.
Well, it's also an elite notion that most women want to work because we're presuming that the jobs are fulfilling and we have a career trajectory when most women are not working in those kinds of jobs. Most women, I believe, are in retail, and, you know, they want to spend more time behind the register rather than less.
But for what we're talking about, you do need stronger families. You need to strengthen marriage, and you know, just in policies that encourage family stability. Now, I agree, we don't have that right now, and so you'd be afraid to tell a young person to, like a girl, you know, get married young and have children. What if she's abandoned? She doesn't have her career, and those are real worries. But the solution isn't just simply to say, throw up our hands and say, okay, just plan to be pretty much on your own, and maybe you'll be able to have one child if you're lucky in your late 30s when your career's settled. This is dysfunctional, and probably, in the end,
unsustainable.
Unsustainable, like the Shakers.
To go back to the original advice, though, and the thing I find that has most resonance, even with planning, just to say to women who also are now and have boyfriends, be generous to each other. Don't, you know, that be not afraid to give things of yourself, because even that seems that women are so terrified that if they make dinner or do anything, or if the man makes them dinner, that there's something potentially compromising in that act. Whereas if you can just try and be kind and generous and open to each
nagging.
other.
There's so much nagging in marriage.
Stop being so suspicious of each other
Yes.
is the thing I would say, because you're never going to have a good relationship if you can't pretty much jump off the deep end and trust that you're going to land.
I see too many marriages where, you know, the women have read too many books and think that he's going to be just like me. We're going to be like roommates and share everything. And it rarely works out that way. There are occasional couples where he comes through and he's like the better cook and all that. But overall, he doesn't care as much about the house. He does not care. He has very much lower standards of what, you know, God, my husband, my God. But, you know, just you have to know that and not become, if you nag a man all the time, so what happens in many marriages, she becomes the mother, the nagging mother. And it's just
That's actually one argument not to have kids, by the way. I mean, I'm for more kids, and I agree with you, but I will say that having kids is tough, and it can be tough on a marriage, and that could happen where having, you know, kids always say, like, or people always say, like, well, it's not your fault, Johnny, that they got divorced, but it actually could be, in all honesty.
But
like,
it's partly the expectations, because you know, what you find when you have kids, when they're very, very little, you know, it tends to be the mother who's just obsessively focused, and you know, sometimes you worry the father might forget something, or I don't know, it depends. But then at different ages, there were different ages where my husband, you know, when they were a little older, was just much more involved.
Right.
And it changes as they grow up.
But it's also, we have a changed modern expectation that there is no such thing as an adult world and a kid world. And I think why marriages are getting into trouble is because the kids are ruling it. It's not just about helicopter parenting. There's no marriage because they're not putting kids to bed. One of the things my husband did is because, as you say, especially your first child, you're obsessive. I couldn't let her cry with that. And he actually, we read this in a book, he put an egg timer and he stood behind the chair and he wouldn't let me get up for 5 minutes to prove that she would stop crying. And then, you know, we would have an adult dinner. And he, but he had to enforce the marriage, as it were. Like to say, you know what, kids, it's your bedtime. We're going back now to our grown-up time. And that's what I see. I mean, it's a schlep.
And grown-up time is so
important.
It's
not
if you want to keep a marriage together.
It's grown-up time every day.
Yeah.
And keeping that line between you and the kids. You know,
a clear line, and not to make them the family religion, the children.
Exactly.
Well, that's like a lot of pressure too. I don't think there shouldn't be. I mean, if my kids are the most important thing in my life and the thing that that defines who I am, number one, I'm in trouble, and number two, they're in trouble.
Right.
That's not good for them, right? And my job shouldn't be that thing either. You know, you need to have a well-balanced life, and your kids are a priority.
And we're seeing the helicoptering is not paying off. It's making them nervous wrecks. And being an aloof parent, as my parents were.
Or a more distracted parent.
And a distracted parent.
A comedian once had, let's say, his mother, growing up in the late 60s, 70s, his vision of motherhood, and he said this fondly, was seeing his mother on the phone pacing behind the plate glass door while he was on the jungle gym falling and doing everything, and she would just occasionally look up and like shake her fist at him, and then go back to talk, you know,
chain smoking.
Like that's what you let the kid
what
be a kid.
What kind of a loser would I be if I cared that much about whether or not my kid was hitting 300 in Little League? I mean, there are parents who
we've seen them,
and I'm like, if I'm defining myself by that, I need the other stuff.
But that's kind of traditional. You know, that goes back to, you know, Willie Lowe. I mean, the father seeing.
You shouldn't care that much.
The child.
You shouldn't care.
Also, you learn that kids, you have much less control over who they are. I mean, you're lucky if you can teach them good manners, and you know,
a lot of it's hardwired.
A lot of it is.
I want to sort of end where we started this, which is to say, I'm so glad that you were both here, because the chemistry. We got into the origin story at the beginning, but there's something that is really great about the dialogue that you two have, and I don't think you could teach it. I just think it's probably natural. You got reps though. You got lots of reps together, but I think there's something great about the way that you're able to.
And the thing, we don't always agree. We've and this is one. I don't even know if you remember this.
Now you started.
We once had an argument. I don't remember what it was.
On the show or in life?
No, in life. And we really disagreed. Yes, I think it was, should I say what? I think it was James Damore.
Okay, I can't remember. Yeah.
You were not on the right side.
Oh, this was a political issue. It wasn't like I hurt you or something.
No. Okay. And we debated, but then we started laughing, and then we both gave a little, we ended up, well, I'm not sure we ended up agreeing. But then I thought, why isn't there more of this? Why can't there just, both of us were sort of talking about a pressing, you know, topical controversy and between men and women and a gender issue, but we were doing it outside the rigid boundaries set by, you know, orthodox
feminism. We talk about
feminism.
it as friends, and in the end, friendship is more important than politics. So if you and I disagree on some political issue, we can tease each other, we can disagree, but the idea that you're going to get up from the table, you know.
Right. And if Danielle thinks something, she's convinced of it, I think, well, maybe she could be right, you know? So I really listen, I learn from it. And we've just developed that rapport. And I think that should be the way people talk to each other. I mean, not just...
cocktails help.
Cocktails help a lot.
Well, although we could get into fistfights if we went the wrong way.
You can sometimes become a little...
Ornery?
Ornery
All right, well, let's transition into cocktail hour. Everybody check out the podcast. It's called The Fem-Splainers. Christina Hoff Sommers and Danielle Crittenden, thank you for coming on the news.
Thank you for having us, Matt. Cheers with our coffee mugs.
L'chaim.
Cheers to you.